And we're back with Jujutsu Kaisen Season 1, Episode 1. Up until now, I've been watching this show in a completely random watch order, and I've seen a good 7 or 8 episodes from Season 1 and Season 2. But the viewers voted on this one, so finally, I think we've earned the right to go back to the very beginning and see what happens at the start of the story. Well, we're right in the middle of things, aren't we? So Itadori is being held prisoner inside of this room with all these tags on the walls, and the one who captured him is this cool guy with a blindfold, who I am 95% sure is Gojo Satoru, although I still can't say that with 100% certainty. This is obviously meant to be confusing for new viewers. It's a technique called in media res, where you start in the middle of a story and then jump back to the beginning. If you've seen the first Deadpool movie, then you're already familiar with this writing technique. But, it turns out, for me, I'm ahead of the curve, because this is the way I've been watching Jujutsu Kaisen all along. I started in the middle, and then now I'm jumping back to the beginning. One thing I will say that's pretty interesting is that it feels like Gojo is presented as an antagonist here, where in the other episodes I've watched, it wasn't always 100% clear what his role in the story was. In fact, at times, he felt more like a mentor or maybe a wild card, especially at the start of Season 2, where he took on more of a protagonist role. But if it turns out that he actually is a villain, then I guess those episodes were more like a backstory to help explain why things turned out the way they did. Overall, I still only understand like 10 or 20% of the story, so I'm doing my best here to cobble together some clues about what might be going on and why these scenes matter in the future. Well, I've also noticed a few cool things in the opening that definitely slipped past my notice before. For example, if you look at this shot with Maki, she's putting on her glasses, and when she puts them on, a cursed spirit becomes visible. Now, I didn't know her name or anything about her until very recently, but in the last episode I watched, she explained that she can't see cursed spirits without her glasses. So, in the introduction, this scene is a good example of visual storytelling. After the intro, we get right into the episode. It seems like there's a few plots going on simultaneously. Itadori's normal school life is juxtaposed against Megami's search for a cursed tool that was somehow lost at some point in time. We're meant to get the impression that Megami is already deep in the life of a Jujutsu student or sorcerer, or I guess whatever they are, and Itadori is kind of living the life of a normal high schooler. You know, I've picked up elements of comedy here and there, but I will say, the start of this episode was the first time where I really felt like the show was grounding the story and the scenes around a more comedic focus and tone. This actually happens a lot with shonen manga and anime. Early on, especially in the first arc or two, the series will be more grounded or more comedic, it will focus around life at school, but then as the story continues, the plot just gets bigger and bigger, and things like day-to-day life in the classroom or scenes of mundane comedy fall to the wayside, as there's just too much other things going on. And the tension and the darkness of the story, the power and the ambition of the villains, ends up taking a huge focus away from that. Anyway, this is Itadori's club, the Occult Club, with an interest in curses, monsters, and spooky things. It's a bit sad seeing how enthusiastic and carefree his day-to-day life is here, and really, it's like they say, you have to be careful what you wish for. I know, based on the future episodes I've seen, his story will eventually become very dark and depressing, and he comes into contact with real curses and real monsters, and it mentally devastates him. So I wonder if he would have rather gone back to this happy-go-lucky school life where he was wishing to see a real curse. I like this girl with the glasses. She's pretty funny, but I don't think we're going to see very much of her moving forward. I don't remember ever seeing her again. Hopefully she doesn't die. I really wouldn't put it past this show, given what I know is coming. While it's played off as a joke, it seems like there actually might be some merit to her theory about what's going on. Megami shows up, and as it turns out, the rugby players actually might have gotten sick due to some kind of curse, or at the very least, there is a cursed spirit lurking around here. In the meantime, Itadori is competing against this teacher, who wants him to join the track and field club. He easily defeats the teacher in a contest of athletics, which of course makes people want to force him into the role of being a member of that club even more. But this isn't what Itadori wants to do. He wants to spend his time doing simple things, pursuing his hobbies with his friends. It's really admirable in a way, because he's not driven by ambition or ego. He's perfectly content to enjoy what he already has. He wants to spend some time with his friends, finish his club activities, and just go home early. I can really relate to this. I've never in my life enjoyed staying late for anything. One thing I liked about this scene, with its directing and the scene blocking, is how Megumi is shown as a background character primarily. Of course, even if you're watching for the very first time, you can already understand that he's someone special and he's probably a main character. And for me, I already know that he's one of the major characters in this series, but it does a great job of conveying how, despite him being here on official business as a sorcerer with knowledge and the ability to perceive things that no normal person can ever see, comprehend, or deal with, to the average person, if they're just looking at him, they wouldn't really know that he's anyone special. Nobody even notices that he's a student from a different school. They just don't care. In contrast, as Itadori is getting ready to leave, Megumi seems to immediately sense the presence of a strong cursed object on him. Now, if I'm going to make a guess based on what I know, I think Itadori doesn't have the item with him right now. More likely, what Megumi is feeling is maybe the presence of Sukuna. For now, Itadori heads to the hospital, explaining at least partially why he likes to end his club activities early, because he wants to go and visit his grandfather. You're given the sense that he knows he's coming to the end of his journey, and in his own way, he's trying to push Itadori away from him, likely to try and protect him from these feelings of grief and loss, but Itadori isn't really deterred from this, and his love for his grandfather is going to keep him at his side until the end. The grandfather character delivers a speech that I feel is pretty powerful and very important to the themes of this story as a whole. He talks about how Itadori should try to surround himself with people who love him, instead of ending up all alone, and more importantly, because Itadori is strong, he has a duty to protect other people, and even if he's not able to accomplish much, he should still do everything that he possibly can. If you've seen as much of this series as I have, even out of order, you can feel how this philosophy and how his grandfather's last words have really shaped Itadori's personality, how he views other people and the world, all moving forward from here. And despite seeming so energetic right up until the end, this is their last conversation. Before he can even process what's going on, Itadori is already talking to the nurse and moving on to the next stage of his life where he is going to be alone. At this time, Megumi shows up to confront him and gives him an urgent warning about the cursed object that he had been searching for. It turns out Itadori and his other club members, apparently, they did find it and they took it because, well, they just thought it was something interesting for their occult club to play with. Of course, as we know, this world is filled with monsters and strange magic and curses and spirits, but beyond that, you see, the members of this simple club, while they might seem like a joke to other students, and the teachers and the administrator and everyone at their school, well, it turns out they're actually onto something. Maybe one or more of the members, maybe not even just Itadori, they have some kind of affinity for the real occult world that is laying there right underneath the surface of the regular everyday world that everyone else is trapped in, because they were able to find this thing and they knew it was significant. Or it could just be a coincidence and they saw something creepy looking and they decided to grab it. Who knows, right? Megumi gives Itadori a quick education on cursed objects and their role in society. Basically, these things are used to protect schools, hospitals, and other places where negative energy gathers. They do this by broadcasting an even stronger evil energy, and that keeps away the lesser evils. But this system apparently isn't really perfect because it eventually gets overloaded and that ends up attracting a strong cursed spirit in the end. Itadori is actually willing to listen to Megumi and he wants to learn about all of this, and he accepts that what he's saying is true. He's not doubting things or second-guessing things. I can imagine he's even going to follow Megami to the scene and get involved somehow. Glasses Girl unfortunately just hit me with the trope of don't worry, nothing bad will happen, moments before something bad is going to happen. Megami and Itadori arrive on the scene just as this curse is breaking out, and I feel like it escaped Megami's notice that Itadori was able to sense the cursed spirit coming from the building. Additionally, he seemed to write this off earlier. He thought that the cursed energy was just left behind on Itadori, and he never considered that Itadori himself might be cursed or have some kind of energy. I'm not sure if it's common to be able to see cursed spirits, but given the way this scene is directed, it appears that the Glasses Girl can actually see them to some extent, and that goes along with my earlier observation, my theory that the members of the occult club, they have at least a little bit of power. I like the way this scene played out, with a focus on how scary the monsters are and how helpless the students are. When the characters in a story become very strong, you eventually lose this element of horror. No matter how creepy a monster design looks, if the main character has magic and superpowers, it's basically just another enemy to fight. But if the only thing you can do is run away and hide, this is the true essence of the horror genre. Anyway, enough lecturing. Megami shows up, and we get a little bit of the flowing, soft animation style that I recognize from later on in Jujutsu Kaisen. He summons a dog and gets ready to confront the cursed spirits. Itadori was told to wait outside because it's too dangerous, but as he's standing there, he can't help but think about his grandfather's last words. I think he realizes that if he doesn't want to end up alone, he has to act. He can't stand here by himself and let other people suffer. He has to make the effort involved and take the first step to involve himself with other people. Now, Megami is able to defeat the weaker cursed spirits with his Shikigami, but even though his offensive power is high, he's not the type of fighter who can get into a good position. He can't defend these students without accidentally hitting them with friendly fire. At this point, Itadori is going to solve the problem. He has this reckless, charge-in headfirst strategy, and it always seems to work for him pretty well. He drop kicks this window, smashing his way into the building, and he lands a signature Itadori punch on the monster. Then, when Megami doesn't have to worry about hitting any innocent targets, he can just cut through the enemy with very little trouble using his high attack power. Now, Itadori has revealed that he's able to see this Shikigami, and I think Megami, for the very first time, is realizing that this kid is special. You know, him jumping 70 feet into the air, flying through a window, I guess to Megami that's just normal behavior. But if you can see some dogs, well, you must be special, right? Now, I was paying very close attention, and I never noticed the monster T-posing even one time. For me, that's a little bit of a disappointment. In a strange twist of fate, the cursed object is actually Sukuna's finger. Huh. I don't fully comprehend the implications here, but this is interesting, and I definitely don't think it's a coincidence. Anyway, I guess the point is that if you eat this thing, you can become stronger, but that's pretty gross. Well, just as Itadori is getting ready to hand it over, a final and extremely powerful cursed spirit ambushes the two by dropping down from the ceiling. Now, to his credit, Megami actually puts himself in harm's way to get the innocent characters out of danger, but unfortunately, because he's a summoner, he's a little bit weak when it comes to close combat. And when he pushed the other people out of the way, he's now stuck in a position where the enemy is able to grab him and repeatedly strike him with a combination of attacks. His summons get dispelled, and he's knocked to the ground and injured. Looking at this scene, it's starting to feel pretty familiar to me. I'm wondering if Megami is like the Vegeta of this series. I mean, he seems strong, but it's like he's always losing to even stronger enemies, and they use him just as a way to show, like, hey, Megami, he's really strong, but look, this monster can beat Megami, so you know the monster is really, really strong. He only exists to make the enemies look more tough. I hope that I eventually do get to see an episode where he really shines through and has a big moment. I just want to see Megami get a win one of these days. Itadori jumps into action and he starts to fight the cursed spirit. He's mostly just relying on his amazing athletic abilities and I guess in a way his courage. Obviously, if he was scared, he couldn't pull any of this off. However, that can only take him so far, because as Megami explains, You can't defeat a curse without cursed energy of your own. And again, this is tying back to the previous scenes. So Itadori comes up with this brilliant idea to eat the finger, which is gross, so that he can obtain Sukuna's power. Megumi thinks that Itadori will almost certainly die, but there's a 1 in a million chance, and of course, this wouldn't be a story if that didn't come true. So, by eating the finger, he's able to gain Sukuna's power, and instantly wipes out this cursed monster. Okay, wow. This changes almost everything I thought I knew about the story. Because, you see, until just about a minute ago, I was thinking that Itadori always had Sukuna inside of him. I thought that Itadori's grandfather maybe had something to do with the cursed spirit being sealed inside of him, and that was why he gave the speech about needing to be strong and protecting other people. And the fact that Sukuna was sealed inside of Itadori might explain why his finger was at the school, might explain why he's able to jump 70 feet in the air, why Megumi sensed cursed energy on him, but nope, none of that seems to be the case. In fact, the impression I'm getting is that if the right person had been here at the right time, anyone else could have become the main character of this story, and that's mind-blowing to me. But it does make me immediately question something else really important. Someone had sent Megumi to go and recover this object. So who did that and what was their goal? Was that person actually trying to get Sukuna's power, or were they just trying to prevent anyone else from being able to obtain it? There is a hint to me here that Itadori must have some other kind of power inside of him that allowed him to integrate with Sukuna, that 1 in a million chance, and I'm kind of interested to know what else he has going on, as opposed to Sukuna just being his main power source or his only power source. Either way, with Sukuna manifested, Megumi just has to try and exorcise him before he gets out of control. He's already taken over Itadori's body and talking about how he wants to go around committing evil atrocities. Itadori is trying to fight back and regain control, but that's not going to solve the problem. And now, even on the very first episode, it looks like we're going to get hit with something that I am very, very familiar with. A Jujutsu Kaisen episode is going to end on a devastating cliffhanger, and especially in my case, because I'm watching these out of order, I'm not going to be able to see the resolution right away. Even in episodes where I do get to see the end of a battle or the end of a plot or some kind of event, it usually ends the episode by setting up with another cliffhanger immediately afterwards. In this case, the only other thing for me worth noting is that the episode ends with a really quick preview of what is to come, and there's no ending theme. This is actually fairly common with airing anime. Typically, the first episode doesn't show either the opening or the ending, and it's usually not until the second episode that you get both of them. So overall for me, this was a really fun exercise, and it does feel like I earned this. I don't think I'm breaking the rules or going against the spirit of this series, where I'm watching the show out of order. At this point, I've seen enough episodes that I think watching the very first one is pretty fair. There was a good mix of confusion, it also answered some questions, it put some of the things I understood into a new light, while not revealing too much, and I can imagine there's still so much about the story that I don't understand. This wasn't any different than me picking a random episode like 115 or 118 and just watching that instead. Now, while we're here, I want to take a minute or two and talk about the process that goes into making these videos. If you aren't interested in hearing about it, I completely understand. I'm gonna keep making these videos no matter what, and even though my editing process is pretty slow, as long as you stick around, I promise I will definitely, absolutely, always deliver more content in the future. If you do want to hear more about the process that goes into these videos, then stick around. So at the very start, after I came up with this idea, I made a list of all of the highest rated episodes across both seasons, and then I narrowed down that list by asking 3 of my friends which episodes I should watch. All they had to do was respond with the episode numbers they thought would be best. At that point, I used a randomizer to pick one of them. If you've been watching for a while, you'll know the very first episode I watched was Season 2, Episode 16, and if you haven't seen that, I highly recommend you go back and check it out. It is one of my favorite videos I've ever made on the channel. Later on, I would switch back and forth between making a random set of episodes based on some criteria, or I would open up polls for my viewers to vote in, and I never usually did things the same way twice in a row. I have to say, I am completely blown away by how many votes I get in some of these polls. I did not ever think that this many people would be interested in watching my random videos where I talk about anime and manga, especially for something as weird as watching a series out of order. And beyond that, people who like the content and care enough not even to just watch every episode, but they're even voting on what I'm going to watch next, to me, that is really humbling. Once I start watching an episode, I will typically take screenshots during my first viewing, and I also pause pretty frequently to take notes. Sometimes I'll even write sections of the script between scenes. However, even though it is more work, I really enjoy making this series, and I want to keep watching the show the way that I've been watching it. It just means that I have to set aside extra time whenever I want to watch an episode of Jujutsu Kaisen. Sometimes it can take 2 hours or even longer for a 20-minute episode, and I have to completely focus on this. I can't do any multitasking. I'm probably not the only person here who has trouble keeping their attention on one thing for a long time. The internet, and YouTube especially, has really trained my brain to love multitasking, so this is something that I have to really specifically focus and hone in on. While I am working on the script itself, I'll usually watch the episode a second time, usually in a different language. This can make it easier for me to take screenshots that I missed the first time without subtitles being on screen, and it also allows me to compare the voice acting between the sub and the dub. I read the entire script out loud myself from start to finish, and if anything sounds weird, like this is not how a real person talks, I make sure to rewrite that line. This process is non-negotiable for me. I know that I could finish my scripts faster if I didn't do this, but I also know that the quality of the writing would go down massively. I would say around 40% of the paragraphs have been rewritten at least slightly, so if you can imagine my scripts were only half as good, I just wouldn't be happy with that level of quality. Thankfully, as I finished more and more of these scripts, I tend to get things closer to being perfect with my first draft, and there's fewer rewrites that need to be done. After I finish the script, this is when I record my voiceover. One important thing about the script writing aspect is that I generally don't go back and fix any mistakes. So if I misunderstand something earlier in the episode, I will keep whatever I wrote down, and then later on, when it's explained to me, I'll react to the show naturally and how my assumptions were proven wrong. I try to explain the misunderstanding, try to explain what I learned, or what is my guess for what all of this information means and what's coming next. And I think it would be dishonest anyway for me to go back and correct all of my errors and try to pretend that I'm always right and that I always predict things and guess them perfectly. To me, that would be way less fun. I think a big part of the humor of this series is watching how often I get things wrong and how I can stumble into the truth for the silliest of reasons. I'd rather write a script that feels like what my thoughts were when I was going through things naturally the first time. I want this journey to be authentic as possible, as I share it with all of you. And while I do edit my script, it's usually just to avoid cases where I use the same word over and over again in the same paragraph, or I have to rewrite something that just flows a little bit more naturally with the way that I'm talking. After I record the voiceovers, I do a lot of work editing the audio. And I mean a lot of work editing the audio, in terms of cleaning up the sound, but also editing out spaces where I pause for a very long time while I'm reading my script, or if I say the word or I say the word like way too much. Sometimes I'll say a line 3 or 4 times and then I pick the best one, so I have to cut that down. All of my mistakes and awkward pauses and the times where a guy drives by my house revving his motorcycle as loud as possible, those things are removed, and ideally, the viewer can't really tell that I removed any sound. It hopefully sounds like I did everything naturally in the first take, but trust me, I am not that good. Although I do have a bit of experience with public speaking, and I can usually get everything done in a single recording session without having to re-record any lines later. Once the audio editing is done, I go through the video in order, and I add relevant screenshots to each section as I talk about it. Sometimes I will skip over a section, work on a scene where I have really good screenshots in mind, and then I come back and I fill in the blanks later. Over time, I have learned some more advanced editing techniques, like how to make the images flow naturally from one to the next, instead of always using jump cuts. And also, if you've noticed, a lot of the times, in my newer videos especially, these still images actually move around slightly while I'm talking. Before I start editing the images in, I will make an overlay. Sometimes I make 5 or 6 overlays, and then I set it so that the images appear behind the overlays depending on which one has the best color balance for each screenshot. In the older episodes, I would usually transition between 3 or 4 overlays in the same episode. However, I have to admit something. Making overlays is by far my least favorite part of the entire YouTuber process, and I tested it out and nobody seemed to really notice or care when I started using just 1 or 2 overlays per episode. So let me know if you actually noticed this, or if you prefer the older style where I'd have more overlays that change throughout the episode as the scenes change. But I suspect people would rather I release new episodes faster as opposed to taking more time, just because of how much I hate making the overlays. At the very least, I'd be curious to hear your feedback on that, because that might help me make a decision about what to do moving forward. As I'm adding each picture and each animation, I will resize them, I crop them, I make other adjustments so they have the best visual balance behind the overlay. Then, at the very end, when everything else is done, the last thing I do is add any images that go into the foreground on top of the screenshots and the overlay. If you see things like a picture of myself talking or a meme that appears on the screen, usually I added this at the very, very end of the process. Between all of these tasks, audio editing, making overlays, adding screenshots and animations to the timeline one at a time, editing everything so that the images show up in the right place for the right amount of time, so everything has subtle movements to make the scenes feel less static. Honestly, it takes a lot of time and effort to do this, but I really love sharing these videos, and it's such a fun way to enjoy an anime. I do know I would still appreciate Jujutsu Kaisen if I watched it the more traditional way, but this experience of doing this is so special and unique, and you really can't compare it directly to how a normal viewing, where I'm eating lunch and just watching anime at the same time, would have gone. So if you've been enjoying these videos up until now, and honestly, if you've watched this specific video all the way to the end, I really appreciate it. Your views, comments, likes, and feedback are all great. And I don't just mean like for the YouTube algorithm or anything like that. The sense of community is something that really makes me genuinely happy, as I'm able to talk about one of my favorite hobbies and interact with people who want to talk to me about it. Right now, I've got a lot of videos in production, and I'm planning to start a schedule of regular uploads in the near future. You probably already noticed I upload videos about other subjects besides Jujutsu Kaisen, so I kindly ask you to just continue to be patient with me, because that is my idea for my channel. I want to talk about the things that I enjoy talking about. However, as a general rule, in the future, if you ever see me upload a video about Pokemon, it usually means that Jujutsu Kaisen is coming next. So keep that in mind in the future. If you're only interested in Jujutsu Kaisen stuff, you should probably have a good idea of when the next video is coming. But I think I have been yapping long enough on this one. For now, enjoy the rest of your day.